Illuminati News, Illuminati News, Illuminati News, Illuminati News. Illuminati News, Illuminati News, Illuminati News, Illuminati News.
My tea's gone cold, I'm wondering why I got out of bed at all. The morning news clouds up my window and I can't see it all. And even if I could, it'd all be great, but your picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad. It's not so bad. Dear Donald, I wrote you but you still ain't calling. I left my cell, my pager, and my home phone at the bottom. I sent 2 letters back in autumn. You must not have got them. But anyway, what's up, man? How's this war with Iran going? I love you, man, I swear I do. I voted twice, wore the hat, but now you're bombing terror. Cause Bibi Netanyahu snapped his fingers like that. You said America first, now we're dying for Israel's benefit. American treasure burning up, American lives getting spent. Lindsey Graham whispering in your ear, Mark Levin screaming on the air, Laura Luma tweeting, hit him harder, got you dancing like you don't care. I even got your face tattooed right across my chest, but every time I see the news, I'm feeling more and more depressed. P.S. We should be together, MAGA forever. You and me. Your biggest fan. My tea's gone cold, I'm wondering.
Welcome everybody, this is a new opening from my friend Jason Lowe, which I wanted to inaugurate today because I think that it reflects the way many of us feel in regards to the way Trump betrayed the values of the MAGA movement.
So bad, it's not so bad. Dear Donald, you still ain't called or wrote. I hope you have a chance. I ain't mad, I just think it's fucked up you don't answer fans. I seen you on TV with Bibi smiling like it's all a game, while American boys come home in boxes and the deficit's in flames. You let the neocons run the show, Grand Levin Loomer pulling strings, pushing you to bomb Iran so Israel gets its original kings. Nuclear war on the table, man, one wrong move and it's all over. Mushroom clouds over the desert while you're playing golf in Florida. My wife keeps crying, kids asking why daddy's heroes killing kids. I keep telling them Trump's the best, but even I don't believe my shit. You betrayed every voter who put you back in that chair for a foreign flag and a bunch of hawks who never sent their kids anywhere. P.S. You still ain't called. I'm starting to lose hope. Your biggest fan, Stan Trump. My tea's gone cold. I'm wondering why I got out of bed.
Jason Lowe, who has done this rap, Dear Trump, of course influenced by Eminem. Friend Jason in the past has been a guest here at the Leo Zagami show during the first year. He's also been in the past a prominent member of the Proud Boys. And like I said, somebody who is truly disappointed with how things turned out, unfortunately, with Donald J. Trump. Today, we saw also that other pathetic scene in the Oval Office with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, who could have been on the right side of history, like Tucker Carlson, like others who have understood the dangers of having somebody who is not only not respecting the promises made during the presidential campaign, but who is turning out to be an Antichrist. But actually, all the signs, the biblical signs, like I explain in my latest article, point out in that direction. I published this article before Tucker Carlson made the same conclusions. He arrived to the same conclusions, I think, 24 hours later. But all the biblical signs are there. In fact, this article, which, by the way, shows also that the White House substituted what used to be this image with this other image, and that is a demon. That is actually a demon known as Master Leonard, and it's a very relevant demon that you can find in the Dictionnaire Infernal, and it is, of course, one of the loyal servants of Satan. So here we are talking about somebody who, I repeat, is always promising but never delivering. Like we discussed last week, all this, of course, fits very well with chaos magic, where everything is permitted and nothing turns out to be true, though, because that is, the inspiration for it came from Hassani Sabah all the way to William Burroughs. And of course, in the second half of the 1970s, then they formalized what chaos magic really is. And Trump continues with his Antichrist spirit. But today we wanted to discuss the subject also in relation to holy wars, because as I've explained in volume 10 of my Confessions, which is dedicated to the eternal conflict in the Middle East, the holy war, the concept of the holy war, was actually born within Islam and then embraced by the Crusaders. So we have this Antichrist, this prominent figure in the end times. As I explained in my article, he was even wounded on the head, which is also said to be a sign, which seems pretty clear to me. It's now, maybe Trump could not be the ultimate, is not the ultimate Antichrist, but is definitely aiding the future Antichrist, because many, of course, are pointing the finger directly on Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, because he's part of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, because he goes around without even having any security clearance, representing the United States for some of the most important crises with Russia, with Iran, and he doesn't really have an official role. Now, we know that the Antichrist is a deceptive figure, that it will appear initially to be quite likable, and Trump got the majority of the popular vote. Now, in regards to what we are viewing now, we have, of course, a way of viewing the Antichrist on the Islamic Shia side, and another way of viewing the Antichrist on the evangelical side, which seems to be the one that is really supporting Trump still. Though there is a lot of people that after Trump presented himself as a Jesus figure, they just dropped off and said, no, thank you, because that is an anti-Christian way of doing things. Now, it's important for all of you to understand that we have been saying that Trump was not reflecting any longer our values for a long time here at the Leo Zagami Show, already since last year with my wife, and then after the publication of the book on Jeffrey Epstein, a book which I wrote and I published because I believe that might be really the holy grail of what is happening now. According to this situation that we are viewing now, the concept of holy war is embraced on both sides. And so let's start today's show also by viewing this gospel according to Quentin Tarantino.
So the prayer is Caesar 25:17, and it reads, and pray with me, please. The path of the downed aviator is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of camaraderie and duty shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to capture and destroy my brother. And you will know my call sign is Sandy 1 when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Now, what happened is definitely unprecedented. Except quoting a fake Bible verse from a Tarantino movie, from Pulp Fiction. I mean, come on, guys. I know that these people want to mock religion, but they are really going a little bit too far, I think. So, you know, when you are actually viewing the defense secretary, now the secretary of war, who is claiming to quote the Bible, all serious there in front of these soldiers, and instead is from a 1994 movie from Quentin Tarantino with Samuel L. Jackson reciting this part, which is a fictionalized version of Ezekiel 25:17. I mean, it's just the epitome of something. I mean, this is the manifestation of something clearly demonic. So when we talk about the religious wars arise from territorial disputes, but in the past they were also based on eschatological, theological differences. Now, major historical examples include, of course, the Crusades. But like I explained in volume 10 of my Confessions, which I have somewhere, it's very important to understand that it was actually Islam that inspired these wars of religion in the first place, the Crusades, because in reality, Jesus never invited his followers to do a crusade. It was the Pope. Religious wars started in the Muslim world. They started between Sunni and Shia, the Battle of Badr in 624 after Christ, and the expansion into North Africa, West Asia. And then the religious wars and the expansions in the Muslim world, especially from Sunni Islam, led Christianity to react with the Crusades. The Pope saw that the Sunnis were, the Seljuk Turks were expanding, and so they decided it was time to react with a religious holy war interpretation of the Bible. And that's what happened. And the Crusades started. Now, some people are still asking me about that opening track we had today. You can find it on the YouTube channel, where one of the YouTube channels, I actually think I uploaded it on all my YouTube channels. And so you can find it there. It's called Dear Donald by my friend Jason Lowe, just so you know. But going forward with what we are discussing, the early Muslim conquest, 632-750 AD, took over many formerly Christian areas, including Jerusalem. And that prompted then the reaction from Western Europe, from the militarization of Western Europe, also in the Reconquista, and the eventual call for the Crusades in the year 1095. But let's say that religious wars, in the way that we know them, are definitely inspired by the Islamic, let's say, conquest, and also their way they used to protect their pilgrims, which also inspired then the birth of certain knighthood orders, like the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre first, and then, of course, the Knights of the Temple, the Knights Templars. But in reality, the concept of holy war is also originally rooted in the Hebrew Bible, and so in biblical tradition. There has been, in particular, certain conflicts in the Old Testament, like the conquest of Canaan, the idea of what is known as the Milmet Mitzvah, the commanded war, or Herem, which is the total destruction of enemies under divine oath, that serve as an early examples of religious warfare. And I published this article on leozegami.com, like I said before. Then we saw also Tucker Carlson making the same accusations and actually citing some of the same biblical verses which I've cited here, because I think it's pretty clear that Trump has made a mockery of Christianity and that Trump is not really following Christianity. And I've been saying that for a while. And you can, of course, know more about it if you get this book, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, because in this book I explain, first of all, the roots of Christian Zionism, which is to be found not in the dispensationalism of the 19th century, but rather, well, dispensationalism helped the expansion of it. But the original idea was in the Puritans. Those Puritans, the same Puritans that came over with the Mayflower, but also the same Puritans that took over England with Oliver Cromwell, beheaded the king, and for a period of time also gave the possibility of great changes because it became a republic rather than a monarchy. The whole of the British Isles were having wars, basically wars of religion, that will eventually stop and lead to the creation of speculative Freemasonry, which had as an initial aim putting together all these various Christian denominations that were fighting with each other. This was one of the aims, even if it's not so well known today, even to Freemasons. And then later on, when the ancient and the moderns in 1813, the Duke of Sussex came together, and they expanded to all other religions, the Masonic project. But in regards to the Puritans, they were the ones who, like I explained in this book, influenced also Shabbatai Zevi, because the father of Shabbatai Zevi, who used to work in Turkey, in Izmir, were the ones who convinced, I think, in a way, through the father, Shabbatai Zevi, to take on his messianic role, which for a brief time he had within, having been recognized by more than half of the Jews worldwide as their prophet. Then we know what happened later on. If you want to know more about the Sabbatean Frankists and how they eventually will give birth to people like Jeffrey Epstein, well, you need to read this book, which is still very relevant. Now, we know that this whole week there has been this squabble, this fight between the Pope and Donald Trump. I've actually discussed it even before it started with an article which also talked briefly about the latest Bilderberg meeting in Washington, D.C. There is still an ongoing war of words, at least, between the Pope and the whole of the Trump administration, including J.D. Vance, who even said to the Pope that he should think better about discussing matters of theology. Now, what should the Pope discuss? Football? I mean, the Pope is obviously somebody who has discussed matters of theology. Now, I don't adhere or I don't lean towards the ideas of this Pope, which I've been fighting from the very moment he was elected, because he is obviously on similar lines to what his predecessor, Pope Francis, was doing. It was actually Pope Francis in 2023 who led them to come to go to Rome and be prepared in order to then be elected the Pope, with the Jesuits behind the scenes, almost imposing this decision on all the other cardinals. And on top of that, they kind of made it look like a good choice to have an American Pope because of Donald Trump. That's why Trump then said, oh, it's also because of me that you have become a Pope. Because definitely there has always been the influence of the most important emperors and kings, and in this case, President of the United States, upon the election of a Pope. It's not only the Holy Spirit that comes from above, and suddenly, you see, the Holy Spirit tells us that this is the Pope. No. Pope is definitely a geopolitical choice. And it's been a geopolitical choice also very clearly since the election of John Paul II in recent times, when they were, of course, fighting the last part of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. It was a choice also with Ratzinger, who in a way took over because Pope Francis was not yet prepared, let's say. However, in volume 12 of my Confessions, which is a very important book also, I explain why this church is favoring immigration, why this church is doing all these things which are, of course, the opposite of what we as conservatives will like. People thought that maybe we will have a more conservative Pope, but that's never going to happen, because the church has changed after the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II, which took place in the first half of the 1960s. Now, the fact that this Pope is fighting openly with Trump has made him actually very popular. Because up until the other day, Pope Leo was simply the successor of Pope Francis, and nobody was giving a damn about this Pope. And now suddenly he is the number one defender of I don't know what in the eyes of many people who see, obviously, Trump trespassing on something he shouldn't have trespassed, because Trump is not a Christian, and he's not a believable Christian. No matter what they say about his religious inclinations, he's not a believable Christian. Now, in regards to the religious wars, previously we had the Crusades, we had also the Muslim inner fightings that led to some wars between the Sunni and the Shia, which have always been the minority amongst Islam, and that now, since 1979, have, of course, a whole country in their hands. And this country, which is Iran, has changed the mentality of the people of Iran in a way that it will be very difficult for a Pahlavi monarch to come in. Because in Iranian Shia theology, and now I want to define a little bit the two different sides here at work. We have the Christian evangelicals and Christian Zionist lot, basically the Christian evangelical Zionists at work with Trump. On the We had some technical difficulty. I apologize for that. We're gonna, of course, recover the 5 minutes that seem to have somehow blocked what I was saying. And so here we are again. Let me know if you can all see me, and we will continue with today's transmission. Okay, you're back. Okay, then. Everybody can see me now. So I was explaining the differences between the two approaches to also the coming, the end times view, the apocalyptic vision in the Shia world as well as in the evangelical world. And I also wanted to talk about the Shia view of the second coming of Christ, because the core beliefs in the Shia tradition, the 12 Shias as they are known, is the belief that this 12th Imam called Muhammad al-Mahdi went into occultation, sort of supernatural concealment, and since then, I'm talking about 874 AD, so a long time ago, he's been expected to reappear at the end of time. However, there will also be the return of Jesus. Jesus, though, of course, in their Shia vision, is almost like the helper, not the guy who is leading the show. So we have 1,300 years old tradition that differs profoundly, because Jesus is expected in this case to return, but to descend from heaven to aid the 12th Imam rather than to lead the show. So the apocalyptic scenario of the Mahdi's return is rather different. The Shia traditions indicated that when Jesus returns, he will pray behind the 12th Imam. And it indicates, of course, that the Mahdi's leadership and his role is always superior. Then you have, of course, the evangelical take, which is rather different. We have the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is active Mahdism, whose high-ranking officials are really deeply entrenched in this belief that the return of the Mahdi is only possible by creating unnecessary global chaos. And then they have an axis of resistance with groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Even if, in theory, Hamas is a Sunni organization, they are always been heavily supported by Iran historically. So there is an indoctrination that has always characterized, since 1979, the regime, the Iranian regime, and it all focuses around this mosque near Qom, which is the Jamkara Mosque, where they indoctrinate most of their followers. In regards instead to the evangelical end times belief, it's very different. We have literally the second coming of Jesus Christ. Often they even believe preceded by a rapture. These raptures where believers suddenly are going to be taken to heaven. And this worldwide view also emphasizes 7 years tribulation, the rise of the Antichrist, and of course the final battle of Armageddon. Now, the evangelicals have provided Trump with roughly 80% of their vote in 2024 and in 2020. 2020, of course, we know how it ended, but they're very loyal. They have been very loyal. I don't know if they will continue, though, to be very loyal. As of early 2025, 72% of white evangelical Protestants approved of Trump's job performance, but that was a very different time from early 2026, when things started to manifest in a way that white evangelicals were not completely satisfied with Trump. They remain, though, a stronger support. We have, though, an increasing element of support also in the past from Catholic voters in the second term, including especially also the Latin vote, which has been unprecedented for the Republicans and for Donald J. Trump. So Trump today, instead of delivering, has disappointed once again, because the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Yesterday, once again, we saw Trump promising in front of Turning Point USA and Erica Kirk that everything was fine, that everything was going great, that he would be with the American soldiers and the Iranian soldiers recovering the uranium, and all that is nonsense, is lies. Nothing manifested. Today, we saw actually the crisis. The crisis is increasing because the Iranians have started to shoot again at the tankers and
Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy corridors, is once again emerging as a major geopolitical flashpoint between Iran and Israel. As U.S. President Donald Trump said, the waterway is reopened, but a U.S. naval blockade remains in place. Iran has now declared what it calls a new maritime order. According to Iran's Parliament National Security Committee Chairman Ibrahim Azizi, international actors must now comply with rules set by Tehran, not social media narratives or external pressure. In a post on X, Azizi stated that under the new system, only commercial vessels authorized by the IRGC Navy will be allowed to pass through designated routes following payment of required tolls. He also shared a revised navigation map for the strait showing a designated hazardous zone near Oman, where ships are directed to move closer to Iranian coastal waters. Azizi added that all passage remains strictly conditional, requiring prior approval from Iran's Armed Forces General Staff and adherence to assigned routes. He further warned that if the United States interferes with Iranian vessels, these transit permissions could be revoked at any time. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has confirmed the enforcement of the new order, stating civilian ships must follow Iran-designated routes, while military vessels are strictly prohibited from passage. Officials say the transition comes in the wake of the fragile ceasefire in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran's defense ministry has also weighed in. Spokesperson Brigadier General Abbas Tlaibnek says the strait remains open only under a conditional ceasefire framework.
Very conditional, and regardless of what is happening with that very frail ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, it seems that today things are not going that well. So many still see Trump as some figure chosen by God, a savior figure that will protect the interests and values of Americans. But that is obviously not the case. And he doesn't have Christian values. His values are Sabbatean Frankist values. He is following the Messiah of the Chabad Lubavitch movement rather than Jesus. and this whole, the centrality of Israel, which is, of course, always been important for Christian Zionism, is now even more important because the Sabbatean Frankists of the Chabad Lubavitch movement have completely taken control through IPAC of the conservative movement. That is really the reason why probably Charlie Kirk was eliminated and removed in a moment in which he was starting to wonder about these Sabbatean Frankists, about these heretical Jews. Now, the roots of Christian Zionism are primarily found in 16th and 17th century English Puritanism, and if you want to know more about it, you can read The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, which I regard as an important book. So then you can learn why these Puritans, particularly in New England, strongly identified the Old Testament Israelites, often referring to themselves as a new Israel and their new home as Zion. But in reality, they also believed that they have always believed that the return of the Jews to their ancestral land was a central part of the post-millennial belief in a future golden age on earth. And then, of course, you had the dispensationalism, which is a Christian theological framework that became very relevant here in the United States of America, starting in the 1800s. Now, we have, of course, this foundational belief that Christians should support the restoration of the Jews to Palestine, and that really manifested. And now, of course, though, things are going astray because now we are witnessing a series of wars that people are viewing as holy, each in their own mindset. Like, for example, even the war between Ukraine and Russia is a religious war, because you have the Orthodox side with Vladimir Putin, which claims, of course, that people like Volodymyr Zelensky are Satanists. People like Volodymyr Zelensky are leading a country that was once loyal to the Russian Orthodox Church, leading them instead towards Rome. And this is also a very important element in our story, because here is not only about what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, but what is already happening also in Ukraine, which has already debilitated and created a massive energy crisis in Europe. Europe that now is facing, of course, a situation of inevitable recession. If this present crisis continues after May, Europe will be led to poverty, because they are almost, kind of squashed between two wars. Now, in regards to what is happening in the Middle East, let's not forget that it's true that Shia Islam is definitely different from Sunni Islam, and they are at times more extreme. But who created Shia Islam? Now, in volume 10 of my Confessions, which, like I told you, is dedicated to Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies involved in the eternal war in the Middle East, in volume 10, I explain that the Erev Rav, that mixed multitude of witches, of witch doctors, of magicians that came out of Egypt with Moses and then infiltrated from that moment onwards Judaism, and that's something that was confirmed even by the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah, so it's not me. saying it. It originated, though, with the Shia Islam originated with a guy called Saba, and Saba was a Jewish member of the heretical Jews. I mean, he was embracing Islam, but he wanted to embrace Islam in a way that went even against the Islamic principles of Sunni Islam. And so the fourth Rashidun Caliph, who was Ali, who was the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, at that point became the main figure for the Shia. Let me see if I find more about the creator of Shia Islam, aside from the fact that you can, of course, go and read all about it in my book. But I have here an AI overview just to explain you who created Shia Islam. Abdullah ibn Saba is a controversial 7th century figure described in early Islamic history as a Yemeni Jewish convert who allegedly fomented rebellion against Caliph Uthman and established extremist Shia doctrines such as the divinity of Ali according to tradition. So, the guy who established the most extreme branch of Islam was a Jewish person, a member of the heretical Jews who have always led astray since Moses came down the Mount Sinai and he saw they were worshipping the golden calf. That is really what we are talking about here. Now, most of you will have never imagined that behind the creation of a faction of Islam that hates so much the Jews, who has embraced every possible anti-Semitic theory, that it was actually a Jewish person. But we go back to that weird paradox, which I've always outlined also in this book, with figures like Adolf Hitler, who was also of Sabbatean Frankist descent, who was also a Jewish heretic, if we want to be honest about it, and who, of course, will kill millions of Jews. Now, somebody's talking here in the chat about Eri Makov. Yeah, I know Eri, 20 years. We go back 20 years with Eri. Remember that this year, Illuminati Confessions is celebrating 20 years online. 20 years, guys. Now, the problem with Eri, I think that he misses the whole point when it comes down to the Sabbatean Frankist. The Sabbatean Frankist is a very complex subject that it's very rarely understood in its fullest capacity, because even Candice Owen, when she talks about them, she only scratches the surface compared to what I've wrote in this book. But we are discussing also, for example, Tucker Carlson, who has at the moment understood certain things. He still hasn't dealt so deep into the Sabbatean Frankist. He's still scratching the surface, but he's starting to get there, especially when he criticized the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is a movement of Orthodox Jews that was infiltrated by the Sabbatean Frankists a long time ago. Anti-Semitism is not something we promote on this show. In fact, even this book says it very clearly, to not fall into the trap of anti-Semitism. And that's why I am explaining things how they are, even if at times they might seem complex, but they are relevant, because otherwise we tend to generalize like some other people do, and then of course you get to become a ignorant anti-Semite. It's not about the race here. It's about people who embrace the wrong ideologies, the wrong religions, the wrong sects. It's like the Catholic faith that has been infiltrated and led astray by the Jesuits, especially after the Second Vatican Council, is like so many branches of Islam that have been infiltrated left, right, and center. And of course, 80% of Jews here in America, they claim they are they embrace Reform Judaism, which is in itself already on the wrong course, because it's abandoning the traditional Mosaic laws approach. So we try to explain, that there is here a holy war going on between two factions, and two factions that also interpret differently the figure of the Antichrist, but they seem to have some similarities. Now, I've found a very interesting, very short video from Joel Richardson, which is not only a best-selling author and a filmmaker, but also is recognized as a preacher and teacher, who has discussed briefly the differences in what is the Antichrist in the Sunni and Shia, but also, I guess, in the Christian tradition.
Years ago, I was exiting Saudi Arabia, and a Saudi Muslim gentleman messaged me, and he said, "Mr. Richardson, I'd like to talk to you. Can I meet you at the airport before you leave?" And I said, "Sure." So this gentleman comes around the corner, he hands me a coffee, and he looks at me and he says, "Who is the Antichrist?" And what followed was a really fun conversation. I shared with him my perspective, and after about 5 minutes, he said, "You and I are in agreement." Now, a lot of people think that when I talk about the Antichrist coming from the Muslim world based on my analysis of biblical prophecy, they think this is somehow hate rhetoric or this type of thing. But that's not true at all. Like, we all have a right to analyze our scriptures and share what our opinions are. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Sunni Muslims of the world, they make up roughly 85% of the Muslim world. Many of them also believe that the Antichrist will be a Muslim, that he'll come from a different part of the Muslim world. Many of them believe that the Antichrist will be a Shia Muslim. Now, many of the Shia Muslims, they make up about 15%, primarily in Iran, believe that the Antichrist will be some type of a Sunni Muslim. Okay, so everyone has their different opinions. Now, with regard to what's happening right now in Iran, let me just say, we have roughly 300 million Muslims globally. That's almost the population of the United States, who are Shia Muslims, who adhere to the belief system of the regime that's falling and collapsing right now in Iran. Now, they teach that they are the divine stewards of the government of Imam al-Mahdi, their Shia version of the Islamic Messiah. And with the fall of the regime, we are about to see, I'll say, apocalyptic disappointment for a population that is the size of the United States. And cults don't die easy. In fact, cults rarely die.
And in fact, then it didn't, I mean, this clip was done when they hoped to overturn in a few days the Iranian Islamic Republic. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because, unfortunately, there is no understanding, I think, on both the Israeli and American side, that if you want to really change things in Iran, you have to first change decades of constant brainwashing. And it's not as simple as simply going in there with a few agents, saboteurs, and giving a few weapons to this or this other faction, that you're going to take over a republic of over 90 million people who, like I said, have been brainwashed. And so it's not going to be very easy to deprogram them. It's a little bit like, when we went into Germany after the Second World War, we had to do a series of deprogramming activities, of psychological operations to deprogram them from years of Nazi programming. Well, the same is for the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there is no way that things can, just turn in a different direction if you simply throw a few bombs and if you give, like I said, a few weapons to some saboteurs, which in the end didn't manage to change anything. In any case, I have found also a video of the second coming of Christ from the Shia perspective. Here, of course, after the usual prayers, then you go into the actual presentation, and it's rather interesting.
I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Hebrews 9:28. So Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting through him. And Acts 1:9-11. After he, meaning Jesus, said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. These are only a few verses from the New Testament supporting this belief that Jesus...
Now, somebody is asking me here from the chat a question which I would like to answer before I forget. Leo Spielberg is a member of B'nai B'rith, so I assume he's probably a Freemason. He's a member of the mega group that was established by Les Wexner in the early 90s, which was the backbone of Jeffrey Epstein's operation. You can read all about it in this book. So, just regarding Steven Spielberg. He has always been a member of the mega group, and the mega group, like I said, is also known as the Jewish Study Group. If you want, I can show you briefly the names of the members, and of course, you can also find in the official list Steven Spielberg here. Amongst the others, we have many others who are relevant, including this guy, who is the biggest, was at least and still is one of the biggest supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, who also was the biggest financier for his first political campaign. So here we are, and let's move forward instead after we have briefly spoke about Steven Spielberg, which seemed to have been an important question. Let's go into the war in Iran as a sign of the end times for evangelical Christians.
Welcome to the Got Questions podcast. So Jeff and I are taking a break from the questions about different books of the Bible. We've been doing a series on what are the most frequently asked questions in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We're going to take a little break from that for a little while and cover some other hot topics, questions we've been receiving a lot of at gotquestions.org and BibleRef.com. As you may know, if you've paid any attention to the news lately, there's a war going on with Israel, Iran, and the United States being the primary nations involved.
Now, for those who don't know who is this guy, he is part of God Question Ministry, which is a ministry explicitly Christian, evangelical, Protestant, and non-denominational, with a theologically conservative and even, I would say, Calvinistic stance on doctrine.
And for the past approximately 3 weeks, this conflict's been happening. We've been getting a lot of questions about, is this particular war conflict in the Bible? Does it have any end time significance? Is this a sign of the end times? And we've done other episodes like this on the war between Russia and Ukraine. A year ago, when Israel and the United States bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. Every time there's an explosion of violence in Israel, this question comes up again and again and again. The busiest day of web traffic in gotquestion.org's 24-year history was October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched the attacks in southern Israel and killed thousands of people, igniting that whole conflict. So obviously, the Bible talks a lot about Israel. The end times is very Israel focused. There are God promises that God made Israel that have yet to be fulfilled. So anytime anything happens with Israel, understandably so, these sort of questions come up. But at the same time, not everything that happens in Israel has prophetic significance. So that's going to be our conversation today. So Jeff, as you've watched maybe a little bit of the news, studied the issues, what are some things both biblically and worldview related that have come to mind?
Biblically, you have that idea of, is this a trigger for the end times? Is this a sign of the end times? I think when we look at what scripture actually says, then I think we've got good reasons to think that, in a sense, seeing this conflict happen kind of makes you think that, okay, I think this means actually that the end times might be a little bit further down the road than they are right now, because of the way this fits into some of the prophecies about actual battles that are going to happen with the countries that are involved right now in the end times. And then from a worldview standpoint, it's interesting to see how issues like this always get tied up in the same sort of worldly tribalisms that we get involved in with anything else.
So here we have the evangelical perspective and the Shia Iranian eschatology. So the Shia Iranian eschatology that views the Antichrist as the Dajjal, this evil figure embodying deception, materialistic corruption, and ultimate opposition to God, which they now openly claim is the Epstein regime, and of course the Epstein Queen Melania and Donald J. Trump. Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show, to 20 years of Illuminati Confessions. You always heard it here first. For 20 years, I've been trying to warn you about what will happen, and now things are actually manifesting. They are manifesting, and of course, the holy wars are part of the rise of the Antichrist, because the reign of the Antichrist is strictly limited in time. And it's not the Antichrist of Peter Thiel, because Peter Thiel is a joke. Peter Thiel, imagine, was talking in Rome about Gulliver Travels, about I don't know what. I mean, the guy is trying to create a justification for Palantir, which is itself a tool of the Antichrist, claiming that instead the AI and robots are protecting us from the Antichrist. So, I mean, Peter Thiel is complete disinformation, and just like some small snippets of truth here and there. Now, the second coming of Jesus Christ, of course, is going to manifest if the ultimate Antichrist comes to fruition, and of course with the false prophet. And they will be defeated, though, all without human intervention, because that is what we hear in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians 2:8, Revelation 19:20. This is breathe of his mouth and the brightness of his coming, and will cast into the lake of fire the enemy. I will add the eternal enemy. Now, according to Christian end times prophecies, you will have wars and rumors of wars, which is a phrase everybody knows that Jesus gave in his discourse which is then laid on Matthew 24:6, in Mark 13:7, in Luke 21:9, and all this Olivet discourse on the Mount of Olives there, they're leading to a final battle that will finally see the destruction of the Antichrist, which is expected to emerge as a charismatic leader, which looks more and more like Donald J. Trump. But Trump is old, and that's the problem. He can't be probably the ultimate Antichrist because he's way too old, but he can be a useful tool for the coming Antichrist. And that's what is happening, unfortunately. And it's pretty clear. the constant obsession with cryptocurrency, the constant obsession with materialistic values that have nothing to do with Christianity. Now, a lot of people have criticized me since in the last few months I've taken an anti-Trump stand. But now that also my friend Alex Jones has done the same, now that people like Tucker Carlson have done the same, now that Candace Owen has been doing the same for a while, and then even Megyn Kelly, I think we are all ready to say the same thing. This guy is dangerous for the future of America. And he's only facilitating the rise of the Democratic Party. Jared Kushner, of course, is his son-in-law, but is also something more and something more sinister, which connects him directly to the Sabbatean Frankist cult. It's not a coincidence that the father of Jared Kushner is now the American ambassador in France, which is traditionally the headquarters of the Sabbatean, one of the most important countries within the Sabbatean Frankist cult. It was the Sabbatean Frankists who actually actively participated to the French Revolution and even the creation of La Philosophie Sociale. And I'm not saying this because I'm making it up. In the wake of the French Revolution, Moses Dobruska, who was the first cousin of Jacob Frank, traveled via Strasbourg to Paris and became a Jacobin, once again with the name Junius Frey, and eventually he was arrested for treason and espionage and executed by the guillotine. But I repeat, France and the whole of the revolution were piloted by the Illuminati and the Sabbatean Frankists. The previous attempt to re-establish the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran has failed and is failing because it doesn't have the right cards. It doesn't have the right backing. And like I stated earlier, after so many years of brainwashing, it's not easy, especially when you're dealing with these kind of people.
Benefit them. At-Tabari chose it and said, and the verse is specific to those who will be among them at that time. And Ali bin Ibrahim mentioned in his tafsir that his father narrated to him from Sulaiman bin Nabud al-Minqari, from Abu Hamza al-Thamali, from Shahr bin Hawshab, who said, Al-Hajjaj said to me, there is a verse in the book of Allah that has worried me. I said, O commander, which verse is it? He said, he's saying, and there is not one of the followers of the book, but most certainly believes in this before his death, and on the day of resurrection he shall be a witness against them. This is a verse we just quoted. By Allah, I command the Jew and the Christian to be beheaded, then I look at them with my own eyes, but I do not see them moving their lips when they die. I said, may Allah rectify the commander, it is not as you have interpreted it. He said, then what is it? To which he responded, verily, Jesus will descend to the world before the resurrection day, and the people of the Jewish or Christian nation will not remain on the earth unless they believe in him before their death and will pray behind Al-Mahdi.
So what they are claiming is that you have to believe in the physical Jesus that will manifest in the end times, but this Jesus that the Shia believe in will still be behind the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, who will be praying in front of him and who will, of course, lead prayer in front of God. Now, this is a very important element in our story because we all know that Jesus will come back, but we don't know when, of course. Nobody knows when, even within the Shia tradition. However, even in the Shia tradition, just as we have in the Christian tradition, as we have said, early wars and rumors of wars. That seems to be the reoccurring theme, even for Shia Muslims. But let's go back to the evangelicals.
There's a lot of discussion about whether or not these are valid or reasonable attacks, whether this is something that the United States and Israel should be doing, to what extent Iran has a right or a responsibility to attack back. And a lot of these things happen, and it's mostly happening in that worldly sphere. I don't hear a whole lot of discussion of people who are taking a sort of a biblical approach to saying, how do we, as people who are not really directly involved in a conflict, look at something like this and process the things that are happening. So for me, I see some biblical things that kind of point away from the gloom and doom aspects, and then I see some worldview things that I guess they're gloom and doom, but they're not super encouraging, because I don't see a whole lot of people really thinking about the biblical side of it. They're thinking more of the political side of it.
No, there's some interesting little tidbits. For example, in the Bible, the nation now known as Iran was known as Persia, or even a little bit of Assyria mixed in there. So there's multiple nations that have inhabited that particular land before it became Iran. The timing of this kind of coincided with what we find in the book of Esther with Purim and those feasts and those sorts of things. So the timing of it has stirred some things up. The Bible does seem to connect some in times events possibly with Iran. I think of Persia, also Elam. There are prophetic passages in Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, etc., that seem to talk a little bit, even Ezekiel, but none of these give any sort of specific enough info that if this happens in Elam or Persia.
Now today, the Iranian leaders said, we are the most ancient civilization in the world. And to be honest, they are. However, like I said, there is a big enemy, the Antichrist, that is manifesting, and that Antichrist seems to be in the White House. So let's check out Jared Kushner, 666 Fifth Avenue. Now it's been conveniently renamed 660. It's a 41-story Midtown Manhattan office that the Kushner companies acquired for a record $1.8 billion in 2007. And the building was subsequently rebranded, and was rebranded for a specific reason, because they didn't want Kushner to be associated with the number 666. Very simple, no? So we have holy wars, we have the rise of the Antichrist, we have everything in place. Now, missing from the equation is, of course, the reappearance of Jesus. Now, this Jesus interpreted by the Shia in one way, by the Catholics in another, by the evangelicals in another. But in the end, what is going to manifest from God is, of course, the interest in bringing mankind away from the evil of the Antichrist and of the fallen angels. Now, in regards to the fallen angels, somebody was also pointing out here in the chat the book of Enoch. And there in the book of Enoch, of course, we have the Watchers, which are in the book of Genesis, in Genesis 6, the sons of God, and then we have their offspring, the Nephilim. And there, of course, we could go on for another hour, 2 or 3, but we don't have that kind of time today. I want to thank the sponsors of today's show: Yo Uzumaki, Demis Bolano Serrique, Glenn Anderson, Daniel Estes, Larry Frascella. Now, some people ask me why we didn't do a show on Wednesday. Well, we haven't received a massive amount of donations. So we are trying to spread out a little bit the midweek show, and we're going to be back next Wednesday. So in a way, we try to be present 2 times a week when possible. But I repeat, it's also based on how many books I actually sell, and also on the donations that I receive. Remember, we not only have my books, but also the cookery book of my wife, Zagami Family Cookbook, Authentic Italian Cooking, which is a great way to transform your kitchen in a 5-star restaurant, Italian 5-star restaurant, of course, with fantastic dishes. These days, with the present crisis, soon it's going to be impossible to go out for a nice meal. So why not stay at home and transform your own kitchen in a fantastic restaurant? My wife has studied a lot when she was in Italy, Italian cuisine, and then she was able to transform our modest kitchen here during the pandemic. And so she has direct experience. And so I highly suggest you purchase this book, which is the first. Maybe there's going to be even volume 2 in the future. Who knows? My wife is kind of preparing for that. Then we have, of course, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, which, like I said today, is a very important book, because in the end, we are fighting the Epstein regime. That is sad but true. I mean, it's an accusation from the Iranian propaganda that we take into account, and unfortunately, it's the truth. And then we have, of course, Volume 12, which is the book which explains you how the Catholic Church has been hijacked. And then if you are interested in knowing a little bit more about the age of cyber Satan, artificial intelligence, and robotics, I mean, robots are being built, especially in China, to take over the world. However, they seem to also have some serious problems every now and then when they malfunction. So we are still kind of witnessing some imperfections, fortunately. Check this out.
3个机器人啊，这2个跑懵了。
Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you on Wednesday with another episode of the Leo Zagami Show. Don't miss it!
He said, woe unto you.